In section 11.2, we're going to look at a couple of hypothesis tests that we can do when we have multiple variables. And the first test is called the Chi-Sqaure test for independence, and this is used to test whether two variables are independent of each other. So you've basically got 4 keywords to help you recognize that you need to do the Chi-Sqaure test for independence. Either the question will outright say the words independent or dependent, or oftentimes the question will use the phrases related or unrelated. So any of those 4 keywords would be your signal to do the process that we're about to learn. As far as your null and alternative hypotheses, they're always going to be set up like this. So the null will always be a statement regarding the independence of the two variables, and the alternative will always state that the variables are dependent of each other. And either one can be the claim, it just depends on the specific question. And since we have 2 variables, we're going to need to organize our data in a contingency table. And that's really just a fancy name for a two-way table where the columns are labeled according to one variable and the rows are labeled according to the second variable. If you compare that with the tables we made in section 11.1, we were only labeling the columns, and that was because we only had one variable in those questions. But now that we have 2 variables, we're going to be using both the columns and the rows. And we're going to do the p-value method for this test, so we do need a way of putting this data into our calculator. And we can't use L1 and L2 since a list is only one direction and we need 2 directions. So we're going to use a matrix to hold our data in the calculator. And if you've never seen a matrix before, it's really just a table with columns and rows. So it works perfectly for this, and it's nothing complicated, I promise. But we do need to know how the sizing works for a matrix so that we can tell our calculator what size matrix we need. And for the size, you just always put the number of rows first and then the number of columns. So for this table here, we have 2 rows and 3 columns. So we would call this a 2 by 3 matrix. So just remember it's the rows first and then the columns second. And I'll go over the calculator steps for how to do the matrix when we get there. So let's go ahead and do our first example. So example 1 says, a researcher wished to see if there is a difference in the favorite sport of males and the favorite sport of females. She selected a sample of 32 males and 48 females and asked them which of the 3 sports was their favorite. Alpha is 0.1. Can the researcher conclude that sports preference is related to gender? Okay, so right away I see a keyword there. So related, okay, we're trying to figure out whether sports preference is related to gender. So that tells me I need to do this Chi-Sqaure test for independence. So step 1, we're going to state our hypotheses. So for the null hypothesis, we just want to make a statement regarding the independence of the 2 variables. So I'll say that sports preference is independent of gender. And then for the alternative, you just change it to dependent. So sports preference is dependent of gender. And then either one can be your claim, so you just have to figure it out. So we're trying to conclude whether sports preference is related to gender. So if 2 things are related, that's the same thing as them being dependent. So related goes with dependent, unrelated goes with independent. So since this is the related one, we're going to label the alternative hypothesis as our claim. Step 2, we're going to follow the steps that I gave you there in your notes for the matrix. I'll just put those up on the screen so we can all see them. And before we even go to the calculator, if the table that they give you in the question has totals on it, I would try to get into the habit of just right away crossing those out. Okay, we're not going to actually use those values at all. Those are important if you're doing this using formulas and tables and not using a calculator. But with the calculator, we do not need those total numbers. So if you leave them there, they might confuse you and you might think that you need to put them in the calculator. So try to just get in the habit of crossing those out if they give them to you in the question. Okay, so if you have your calculator, I would grab that now so you can follow what I'm going to do. So to get the matrix in your calculator, you're going to hit second and then the x to the -1 key. Okay, you can see right above there it says matrix on it. So do second x to the -1 and then go over to edit. And that's a list of all the matrices you could use. Just pick the top one, A. And then now we need to tell the calculator what size matrix we want. Okay, so you're going to look at the data in the question. So we see that we have 2 rows, male and female, and then 3 columns for the 3 sports. So just go ahead and type in 2, and then you can either enter over or press the arrow, and then put a 3 there. And you'll see it like building the table as you put the numbers in. So obviously after you hit 2 by 3, you know, the size that's on your screen should look exactly like the size of the table in the question. If it doesn't, then you know you did the size wrong and you would just want to go play around with the numbers until they did match. And then you're just going to fill in all the numbers. So you'll go 18, 10, 4, and then 20, 16, 12. You just press the number and then you can press enter and it'll move over to the next spot. So fill out all of those. And then once you have your matrix filled out, we're on step 4 now. You're gonna go to stat and then go over to tests. And then we want the Chi-Sqaure test. So it's pretty far down, so you can either scroll down, or I went the other way because it's kind of faster to loop around backwards. But select Chi-Sqaure test, and then you should not have to change anything here. So hopefully your calculator just already has matrix A as the observed, matrix B as the expected. You'll never have to touch those. If for some reason your calculator doesn't have one of those there, send me an email and I'll see if I can figure out how to tell you to get that back there. But pretty much just go to calculate, and then we want the p-value. So you can see that there, it's 0.3034. So we have our p-value, 0.3034, and then from there, it's easy. So step 3, we'll compare our p-value with alpha. So 0.3034 is greater than 0.1, so we do not reject the null hypothesis. So let's see, we didn't reject the null. The claim is in the alternative, so that means that there is not enough evidence to support the claim that the sports preference is related to gender. So we'll do one more example, and I'll have you guys finish this one out so you'll figure out what the p-value is, but I'll help you out with starting it out. So example 2 says, a book publisher wishes to determine whether there is a difference in the type of books selected by males and females for recreational reading. A random sample provides the data given below. Alpha is 0.05. Test the claim that the type of book selected is independent of the gender of the individual. Okay, so I see a keyword there, independent. We're trying to see whether 2 variables are independent of each other. So this is the Chi-Sqaure test for independence. So step 1, your null hypothesis will just say that the type of book selected is independent of the person's gender. And then the alternative will just say the same thing, but with the word dependent in there. And then it's obvious here which one is the claim, independent. So the null hypothesis will be your claim. And then step 2, I'm going to let you guys get the p-value so you can practice with your calculator. I'll just kind of talk you through what you want to do. So you're going to go second, x to the -1, go to edit, select enter on the first matrix A there, and then if you did the previous example, your size will be correct already because this is also a 2 by 3. So you'll just type over all of the previous entries with those ones. If you didn't do the last example with me, then you'll just put 2 by 3 and then fill those out. Then once you have your matrix filled out, you'll go to stat, go over to tests, go up or down till you get to Chi-Sqaure test. Just click calculate, and that'll be your p-value. And then step 3, whatever that p-value is, I'll tell you that it is less than 0.05. So that means we reject the null hypothesis. So we're rejecting the null, which is the claim. So we'll say that there is enough evidence to reject the claim that the type of book selected is independent from the individual's gender. And if you had any issues with the calculator as far as the matrix, just make sure that you email me and I will help you out with that.